Hello you guys, welcome back to another episode of the Cupcake Engineer. So normally I would be making some sort of cupcake creation for you guys, but this time I thought I'd switch it up and I thought that we would have some fun with frosting. So I've gone down the rabbit hole of Instagram bakers and frosting videos, and there are some incredible things that people can do with frosting. Like, have you guys seen the flowers that people make with frosting tips? It's insane. So I pretty much only use the same 4 piping tips every single time I frost because I'm used to it and it's easy that way. But I have a cupcake kit. I have a piping kit that has so many different piping tips in it that I've never used before. Like, I only ever use these big ones because I know how to use them, they're easy to use, and a lot of the time when I'm frosting cupcakes, I'm frosting them all the same. I'm not trying to do anything fancy, and so I'm just doing a typical kind of like circle up around the cupcake, and so it'll either be like one of the star tips or just the plain circle tip, but I'll stick with the small ones. But there are so many of these smaller tips that have different ends on them that you can do fun, cool things with. So I thought, let's play around with them, see what we can create, and see what happens. So I also wanted to show you guys how to properly use a piping bag, and when you're switching piping tips, there's actually these little plastic things. I don't know what you want to call them. I don't have a technical term for them, but it basically has a threaded end on one side. You put this inside the piping bag, and then you put the piping tip actually on the outside of the piping bag, so you can just pop the piping tip off and pop a different one on if you want to switch piping tips. Normally, when I'm just using one singular piping tip, all I do is I just put this inside the piping bag. I put the actual piping tip inside the piping bag and then pipe from there. But when you use this little plastic guy, you can switch them out and you can use a whole bunch of different piping tips in one go, which can be really exciting depending on what you're trying to decorate your cupcakes as. So first things first, I didn't even count how many piping tips I have in here, but if I had to guess, I'd say around 15 or 20. So my goal is just to first off use each piping tip on the cutting board and just do a little bit of a round just so you guys can see what each piping tip does. And then we can go into piping our cupcakes, which, let's talk about the elephant in the room. I just used a cake mix for these cupcakes yesterday just because it was easier and we weren't making any special cupcakes, but I did burn half of them. This is what happens when you don't set a timer. And I was like, oh, I'll remember, I'll check on them. Obviously did not. So half of them are kind of a little bit overcooked, but the other half are really good and delicious. So let's get started with that. So I wanted to throw in a quick voiceover walking you guys through what is going on with putting these piping bags together. So I already have all of my piping bags cut open to the length that I want, which normally they don't come pre-cut. I've done these all myself, or they came like this because I actually don't remember cutting them. But if you have to cut them, just put the piping tip kind of through the end, make a decision of where to cut. It's better to cut, shorter than longer because you can't go back, and once your piping tip goes too far through, it's going to fall through when you're piping, and then the piping bag is useless. So because we're going to be switching out these tips, I'm going to be using the plastic piece, so that's going to go into the piping bag first, and just put that towards the end, like as if you were going to put a piping tip straight into the bag, and then you put the piping tip actually on the outside of the piping bag this time, over top of the plastic piece. And then there's also the plastic end that's going to screw on the very end, and that's going to secure your piping tip onto the piping bag, and then you can just swap out the piping tip really easily using this method. So I did end up pulling out some of these piping tips, and I don't think I'm going to use them because they're just circular tips, and I don't think they're going to be anything exciting. You would use those like probably if you were going to do some writing detail or other kind of detail, but I'm not planning on doing anything super exciting with these tips this time, so I don't really see a point. But I also noticed
kind of weird.
So it might be hard to tell on camera, but there's actually, it looks like 2 different materials that are being used for these piping tips. So it looks like this one's more of like a stainless steel and this one's more of like a brushed aluminum. I don't know why there's a difference. I don't know if a difference is going to be made when we pipe, other than of course, you know, a different tip end. Maybe because this one's more detailed, it needed a different material. I don't know. I just found it pretty interesting that there are 2 different types, but now we can actually get into the piping.
So I'm just using canned frosting for this because I couldn't be bothered to make my own frosting, and canned frosting works just fine. Plus it's equally delicious. So, and in a little bit I am going to dye the frosting in a couple of different colors so that we can put different piping tips together, but for now I'm just gonna stick with it as is, which is basically just a white kind of a color, and I'm just gonna fill up my piping bag. I am gonna start with a tip, and I'm just gonna start with a star tip because I feel like I kind of know how that one's gonna turn out. And so again, you put that one insert inside the bag, you put the piping tip on the outside, and then you screw on the piping tip with the second plastic piece. And if you're not comfortable with piping bags yet, a nice trick is to actually put your piping bag over top a tall glass, because that will just help you open it up. I know for the longest time I really struggled with piping bags and getting them open. Even now, sometimes I prefer using a cup because it just makes it easier. Plus then you have a second hand free, which just makes it easier. So I'm just gonna fill this with a little bit of frosting.
Hey you guys, so I'm just here editing this video and realized that I never filmed an outro. So I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. I was really happy with how some of the cupcakes turned out. Some of them were a little bit questionable. Like, I realized that they were going downhill and I tried to fix them, and then I think I made some of them worse. But this was all just about learning how to pipe some different things, and I'm pretty proud with how some of these turned out. I'm also really excited that I figured out how people make leaves. Like, I did not realize it was just a piping tip. I mean, I need to work on the technique a little bit, but I think overall it was pretty good. So I will see you guys next week. I will be going back to making a cupcake creation for you guys. So I hope to see you then. Bye.